This is WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM. WRUU, we're Savannah sounding community radio with global soul. This is the WWS broadcast, Way Savannah initiative, Less Than Human, Part 1. And welcome to our revolution ceremonies. Yes, dear Drumfolk, freedom is the heart to make revolution, and thank you for joining our liberation ceremonies once again. Mission statement. You ask, what is Way Savannah? Well, we're here to complicate, challenge, syncopate, dismantle, contrast, dissect, and break regularly adjusted narratives, and to suggest and demonstrate that accepted or expected neutrality reproduces unequal power flows. B, we're here to provide multiple long-range alternatives which have well-researched, relatable, and useful knowledge benefits ordinarily excluded or omitted from adjusted power flows. We're here to assert consistent, serialized, and unapologetic countervailing narratives as normal practice, to indeed polyriddim. And C, in the spirit of Yaupin and Buna, the native and African indigenous customs of powerful discourse and dialogue accompanied by medicinal tea and coffee and social therapy. D, it is within this questioning spirit that we bring about a thought world where we'll discover why Juneteenth is not the same as Stono commemoration, why the 4th of July can never be like a 5th of July remembrance, why 1619 pales in regards to the 1526 insurrection, and why generally freedom is the heart to make revolution. Hello, this is Dr. David Pleasant presenting Way Savannah Kanapaha theme of the month, Less Than Human. And now to the Kanapaha. Less than human. Wehrmacht Germany, under the rule of fascist dictators and Nazi propaganda theorists, used shock troops to first go in targeted regions to soften up the enemy. After that, a surge of tactical forces arrived to solidify the damage and establish complete authoritarian control. The initial unit was called the Einsatzgruppen. Following the Civil War and the Abraham Lincoln advocated military surge westward, Americans established alternate ways of consolidating control and authority. A part of that effort was carried through the executive branch, law, and courts. A major part of power and control, however, belonged to the American Einsatzgruppen. The people, whites primarily, imposed a civilian rule through assumption and prolepsis, the way things ought to be. The lesser humanity of certain people and groups was a peacetime weapon wielded through systemic and bureaucratic constructs, a customary apartheid, a segregation and Jim Crow ethos. Sometimes the peace for blacks and natives, especially as segregation, terrorism, and near complete marginalization, also bled into outright violence. Lynch mobs, bombings, shootings, rapes, and etc. were weapons in the hands of citizens, white citizens. The unspoken rule of the American Einsatzgruppen occurred either under the power of law or in its consolidated blind spots. Municipalities in total participated in fixed hearings, kangaroo court-type trials, and lynchings. The peacetime Einsatzgruppen existed in the minds, practices, and customs of regular citizens. Customary apartheid. All of the juridical, economic, scientific, and real estate limitations placed on undesirable people were first embedded in a general assumption about the fitness or entitlement of those ostensibly considered less than human or lesser human. The peaceful war was on. Closely following it was and is a legacy of Jim Crow standards of perception. Those ways of looking at things, those outlooks manufactured a place for the other, which consolidated and solidified what ought to be, north or south. The declarations of Andrew Jackson and those like him resonate fully with the so-thought well-intended focus of the Nazis. It was both their duties, patriots and Nazis, to bring the best to progress, modernity, and humanity by seizing power and wielding it for a greater good, for a gentrified humanity. To do this, both cadres believed that it was their right to stretch out into the underdeveloped space and time. The Germans called it Lebensraum. Jackson said nearly a century before Hitler said Lebensraum. True philanthropy reconciles the mind to these vicissitudes as it does to the extinction of one generation to make room for another. Nor is there anything in this which, upon a comprehensive view of the general interests of the human race, is to be regretted. Philanthropy cannot wish to see this continent restored to the condition in which it was found by our forefathers. What good man would prefer a country covered with forests and ranged by a few thousand savages to our extensive republic, studded with cities, towns, and prosperous farms, embellished with all the improvements which art can devise or industry can execute, occupied by more than 12 million happy people, and filled with all the blessings of liberty, civilization, and religion? Note on this now, prestige architecture offers an intriguing entanglement of both art and industry. We are, however, much more than contributors to exploitative and injurious empire, exceptionalism of suit and tie wearing success stories, or stagnant managerial fixtures. In other words, it's to look at the things that are organized in society that have power or willpower, how things are thought about that control the way people see things and the outlooks that they have, be it actual architecture to things or the way people describe things or have languages to present them. Presently, a divisible justice operates as a racial justice or restored justice. The remedy for acts, tragedies, terrors, threats, harms, damages, and even deaths, which never should have happened, get a payoff, a payback in the aftermath. A remedial justice takes the place of a whole preemptive justice, otherwise guaranteed by an equally distributed, indivisible justice. Time, life, quality of life, opportunity, and wealth lost is deemed case solved when remedies, often insufficient ones, take the place of a normal expectation of no harm done or no harm looming. But for certain citizens, threat, harm, injury, and damage always looms, and more often than it should becomes real. Inclusion, diversity, and first, fill in the blank, do no less than cement the ongoing skew. So in other words, to look at things in this way, which this is an example, is to have things conducted through a particular outlook that people accept as normal or neutral, and it's not. Preemptive justice is different than remedial justice, getting some payback after you've already been injured or killed. So all of these things conduct what we might call peaceful violence or silent violence, times and spaces. These are less than human places. The creation, control, and experience of spaces are central forces in human behavior, communication, and social relations, and therefore an examination of the archaeological record of the spaces created used within a plantation context can inform our understanding of those relationships of power and exploitation. Plantation landscape spaces are dynamic in several ways, changing over time and space, but also function at multiple scales and audiences simultaneously. That's presented by Sanford, 1999, Heath and Lee, 2010. Again, depending on the perspective and context, a single physical area can form numerous social spaces that can include and exclude, be imposed and appropriated, communicate and enforce all at once. That's by Lefebvre, 1991, and Tilly, 1994. Again, this is to look at things that are silent, things that just occur as a type of performance that people think is neutral, but actually there's a power through language and narrative presence that acts on us to think a certain way, to see another way, to not push back against things that we might feel or know are incorrect or unjust. The text selection above, drawn from the observations of Andrew Wilkins, point up the ways in which prestige architecture articulates authority in spatial power zones. The term prestige architecture comes from World War II Hitlerian uses of architecture in the theater of fascism. Super, grand, powerful, and looming structures of the Wehrmacht were created to stimulate feelings of insignificance for all individual subjects standing before the supreme gaze, will, and authority of both tyrant and state. The plantation, similarly, was made to forge industrial and technological resources into one single determinant of enterprise and planter power. It was the art and industry. Separate spaces were made to delineate value and utility for both the slave and overseer. Top rank always belonged to the planter master, who would, through his efforts to capitalize resources, provide a trickle-down structure of wealth. All for him, then a little something for the overseer and drivers, and nothing for the slave beyond operating costs. The place of places for either the enslaved or his underclass white or black driver, trustee class jailers was fixed. Any interpretation of value, meaning, representation, or expectation for them was delimited in the terms of lesser presence, resource, or value. The master bestowed all pay, gifts, largesse, or freedom, with quotes around it, as manifestations of his personal will. Ethics, morals, law, or justice were all secondary to that will. Compassion operated as a gift, and empathy eluded any and every estimation of collateral presence or democracy. The undermaster's will or presence was always inferior to that of the upper level master. Given exhaustive studies of income, wealth inequality, land ownership, and mass incarceration today, it's unnecessary to have to prove the validity of otherwise well-documented disparities. As possible carryovers into the present and its terms in the renaming and echoing of the same structural complements, however, such present-day skews deserve attention. Along with mass incarceration as a past and the present slavery, there are other ways that old-time segregation, enslavement, and disparity mirror current structural directives, otherwise named or renamed as neutralities or sometimes profit-sustaining enterprise. Many cities have begun to frame histories of the plantation and its residues of racism, segregation, aesthetics, art, selective history, and industry, etc., as values of travel and leisure enterprise. In doing so, it's possible that, given the obvious changes since the Civil War, civil rights struggle, desegregation, black power, and etc., a blind side exists as to the possible unforeseen threats or neutralized damages still located in relatively unchanged narrative structure. That is, the echoes and backbeats which sustain the same customary apartheid and segregationist tendencies of the past in today. While the same physical and archaeological places and lifestyle garner interest as attractions now, romance, sentimentalism, macabre fascination, and beauty, and today's tourism enterprise, the languages and expressive formats in them may simply realign the same troubling racial alignments as before. Yet now they operate in prestige architectures of story and narrative, tour narratives, a bully heritage narrative. As narrative conserves power, unspoken connotative force, and omissive dimension, they do the same damage. Slave and plantation narratives, no matter how contentious or sympathy-inspiring, center on an architecture, a prestige architecture, still of subjugation and bondage, not escape, rebellion, and freedom. In a city where slave economy thrived and Confederate sympathizers loathed and scorned abolitionists and union interventionism, in a country priding itself on a give me liberty or give me death, live free or die, and circle the wagons ethos, the language and comportment of some thriving black tour providers is, oh, I'm not antagonistic about slavery. The deprivation of liberty and the denial of freedom in line with customary segregation also situates a normalized emotional expectation. That is, anger over slavery is different than anger from expected anger over denials of universal freedom, like a Declaration of Independence style freedom, a freedom of democracy for, quote, regular people, the cause of colonists, Confederates, and patriots, but not the entitlement of slaves. For that, we don't get angry about. The deprivation, of slaves, enslaved people, consequently, is not seen as something to get angry about or something which should upset ticket buyers. It's a neutrality, a supposed to be expected normal. Present-day examples of this might be found in the branding or marketing of various celebrations, festivals, parties, fetes, renaming, tributes, or carnivals extolling multicultural and or cultural representation with history, heritage through lines as flavor. As festivals, celebrations, attractions, fun, parties, enjoyment, entertainment, rides, and consumerism get conflated with genuine historical and historiographic cultural material. Genuinely complex historical narrative is sidelined. Somber themes such as liberty, equality, justice, chattel slavery, insurrection, genocide, rape, lynching, war, and etc. confer particularly concerning matters, to say the least. They are much more than touristic lures or calculations, especially when the existential meaning of liberty itself is a segregated affair. Like, for one person, liberty means one thing. For the other, it means something else. That is, for one, subjugation. For the other, just unbound entitlement to freedom with anger, with passion, with desire and designs, or nothing less. Assertion, declaration, anger, and righteousness for the one, gratitude, deference, subservience, and get-alongism for the other. And just as on the plantation of the past, where protest, recrimination, and political organizing were banned because it upset the genteel good massa fantasy of oligarchs, present-day holidays and festivals supplant needed countervailing narratives of liberation, protest, and rebellion. Things that would upset people watching either television news program or advertisements about the great attractions and fun that you might have in this city. Voices of dissent do not have an equal place in the dialogue, if in fact there is one. On art and industry, a world-renowned art lover, art enthusiast, promoter, and devoted community developer once said, "Art flows from and is an expression of a community's soul, of its ideals. Thus, art must be an appropriate part of its ceremonies." His statement alone illustrates that the simple embrace of art and community as transcendent or intimate values or qualities alone does not insulate either category from intensely scrupulous analysis that's needed. The quoted individual understood the calculable potential of art and community as behaviorist modifiers, that is, tools for possible social control. Without a centrality or a relevant ethos focused upon equality, justice, love, and fair play as serious ideals beyond simple camaraderie or laissez-faire capitalism, art and community may merely operate as instrumentalities of regularly adjusted power and authority. The quote is actually from Adolf Hitler. Today, newly adjusted narratives are simply installed so that terms such as peace, quiet, oneness, togetherness, art, and community might cloak substantive critiques of adjusted organization, the status quo, the way things are done, that carry on the same disparity as we see in the past, now in the present. History, human rights, and democratic principles, similar to other aspects of life, require a full range of social, political, and emotional responses. Anger, rage, pushback, rebellion, contextualization, genuine equality, and etc. When state and municipal authority either designate or redesign the terms of focus or quality of emotional impulse, the depth and complexity of historiography gets muddled and disseminated. An approved dissent category often emerges, such that deeper content, as in controversial figures, places, events, receive a baseline treatment that's tailored for a neutral comfort and expectation. Enjoyment options, which might be monetized. Otherwise, complicated themes are corralled in terms of happy, a neutral celebration, festival, attractions, a carnival, shows, commemorations, art, aesthetic appeals with no antagonism, no hostility, no substantive pushback or critique of regular authority. Just like those on the Good Masses plantation, or maybe on Martin Luther King Day when it's a dream and nothing else. The best they can get is a term of ambiguity. The term complex is ambled in, yet with no real analysis. Personal gratification through sanitized consumption is promised. It is made palatable for mainstream attraction seekers, and at best conserves privileges and entitlements already constructed in a bully heritage dialogue, those designed to keep things just like they are, a colonialism, Confederacy, and antebellum oligarchy that always mattered and still comes first. Temporal distance creates an empathy foil by enabling disavowals of anger, avoidance of disturbing content, replacement of discomfort with pleasure, that is with fun and entertainment, aesthetic appeal, and confections, or the translation of discomforting suffering into tidy, emotionally bereft analysis of factoids. A past as an over there and back then, a timeline as opposed to a right here and now, automatically hampers and reduces redress. At best, such travel and leisure narrative exposes, but often does not explore, the historical facts of enslavement as a circumstance away from the genuine presence or humanity of the captives. Their fullness as human beings entitled to complex historical, psychological, philosophical, and spiritual scope with a fully engaged, countervailing narrative force, escape, rebellion, and freedom. At worst, they are deliberately purged of any manifest power or moral authority particular to the enslaved as self-emancipators, self-liberators, self-educators, abolitionists, Reconstruction advocates, insurrectionists, or particularly as revolutionaries, people with aspirations and feelings and the same give me liberty or give me death, live free or die ethos, expectations, and hostilities as patriots, full human beings. The rebel African or Seminole Maroon complicates the normal shibboleth of patriotism and ordinary bully heritage. As the patriot story outwardly and inwardly enabled chattel enslavement and its protocols, that is, the patriot's naturalized authority of getting paid in slaves and confiscated native lands for a revolutionary war of enlightenment, freedom, equality, and independence, the African, however, the insurrectionists, the African insurrectionists upended that comfortable assumption and comforts enjoyed in the customary bully heritage narrative. The truth of an indivisible liberty and justice is shaken to its core. The omissions otherwise stabilize normal tropes and unquestioned presumptions about an adjusted freedom. Without genuinely equal justice, quality, liberty, liberalism, or say-so, presumably for all, swallowed whole and without antagonism when genuine freedom is so perversely denied. The enslaved person supposedly isn't supposed to be angry because he's a slave, but the patriot should be angry and hostile about being controlled by any foreign power, be it European or otherwise. Approved dissent events merely reify all pre-existing frameworks of authority, control, and expectation. They fall right into step, a march from the past to the present. No different than the plantation legacies and prestige architectures of the Wehrmacht demonstrate the scale and predominance of fascist power. A clear example of this might be noted in regular TV spots and ads for burgeoning Gullah Geechee travel and leisure enterprises today. In these events, the subtext rather than the history, knowledge, critique exists as fun, enjoyment, and entertainment, of course, with a disclaimer that it's for everyone. Understandably, these ventures indeed made for enjoyment and pleasure cannot, for the sake of ticket sales, disappoint enjoyment protocols, but the surrounding context for them reproduces a manufactured groundwork for reproduced damage. This focus exposes a dilemma which must eventually be addressed. Tourism in a travel and leisure context is not an appropriate instrument for the delivery of genuine historical content or historiographic presence. Another form or format may be needed or may need to be explored or created. Understanding does not preclude accountability. Genuine culture is much more than a lure for ticket sales. Once this is known and understood, it is the accountability and responsibility of people engaged and involved in historiographic work to make sure that the presence of African figures, Native American, indigenous people, figures who were escape, rebellion, and freedom people, Maroons, Seminoles, those who pushed back, those who carried on a countervailing narrative and dialogue through their performance and act of revolution and insurrection, are not people that are presented one time only, or just certain one person did it, or you do it one time and you already did that and dealt with it. It's supposed to be ongoing, an ongoing presence that is committed to and that is a part of, at the very least, a balanced representation of African native historiographic presence, always available in the region. The usual omission is replaced with the diverse inclusion of congenial and palatable descent from the state, reified by consumption and taste, flavor, spice, special sauce, delight, and fun. The slave shacks will always be over there. meaningful, troubling, somber, and disturbing history as otherwise translated into brand expectations, of which attractions, enjoyment, and entertainment, as long as they go along with chattel slavery, brutality, rape, lynching, exploitation, white supremacy as fun, and the pride of so-called contributions as tropes of inclusion and diversity. Now it is the palliative brand. The language protocol of all black producers and managers imply harmlessness, hospitality, or neutrality through approved and allowable dissent, a second-class treatment of history as solidified in the eyes of patrons and eager consumers out for a good time with exotically flavored, yet not too spicy fare. And what about the response? Apathy appears simply as a weaponized byproduct, a form of neocolonial suicide or self-mutilation. It is made to look like a defensive response. The damage otherwise enables and certifies telegraphic power. Either persons or collectives who fail to act, respond, participate, or otherwise counter and preempt hegemony guarantee the resource of the powerful. The hegemon, the powerful, no longer has to physically react to his own defense. It is protected from harm. He is protected from harm by a secondary entity which reacts to the primary threat. The act telegraphs gain or profit to the ruler, though through organized and collaborative inaction, by not fighting back, by not having a countervailing narrative. Rooted customary practice, such as Drumfolk legacies, would offer restrictions on that power as forms of collective action and revolutionary participation. Weaponized apathy and non-participation, however, are obstacles before those wishing to disable authority. It is indeed counter-revolutionary agency. It's not neutrality, not getting involved, not participation. That's not doing nothing. You're doing a lot by doing that. You're creating power and resource for the powerful. Power wielded against the master in that instance is stalled or choked off by those willing to avoid or otherwise alter focused challenges to the seemingly ordinary practices and fixtures in established enterprise. The person or community under control or allegiance will police its own ranks so as to mitigate harm to the masters, powers, or constructors or structures of control. Compliance, complicity, and instrumentality work as neutral managerial impulses. They contain the way things are supposed to go and ultimately adjust the fit of what things, ideas, or people which have to go away. Ultimately exist as participation through non-participation, selective apathy, weaponized apathy, as a counter hegemony. In short, ain't going to do nothing that might rock or sink the boat. As an inadvertent or unintended act, it nonetheless is an action which reproduces harmful consequences. It is a webbed-in, self-policing used to stabilize status quo interests. In the glaring absence of established, balanced, serialized, or highly promoted countervailing narrative, this new prestige architecture cements complementary distance and segregation no different than that of the past. The slave shack stays over there. It's merely renamed or reclassified. A place is made for heritage, history, and people, and side narratives presumably equal, but obviously separated from challenging contextualization and historical content, which is always an unequal place. The story of plantations and masses, colonial, Confederate, antebellum, and Jim Crow, wealthy oligarchs, corporate control, and neoliberalism always lead the way. The story is simply sustained with the contribution narratives of slaves who swell and support wealth, authority, control, and the master, yesterday and today. The spiritual and psychological dimensions of having fun and splendid time, enjoyment, entertainment, and places where spatial and temporal distress may have happened, require more investigation than can happen in this short essay. The fact is, however, that the balm of a thrill and gratification or enjoyment may be questionable options for the engagement of historical material which greatly lacks readily available foreground and serialized archival representation or contextualization. A fully available and present intangible quality of performance, of thought, of ethos, of liberation, of escape, rebellion, and freedom. This alive and well every day. An architecture, a prestige architecture, nonetheless confers the orientation of participation of selectively higher to lower powers totems, just less than human, just like the plantation master, less than human, just like the Wehrmacht institution in World War II under Hitler, oversee a house and slave shacks, dot the way and the pathway to a less than human dimension. A prestige architecture of language, narrative, connotation, and bully heritage consequently echoes on every pace groove echoing into the future. A less than human position as conserved as a regular, inviolable complement. Customary apartheid is the open manifestation of less than human normalcy. James Baldwin said, and we can take heed, a writer is obliged at some point to acknowledge that he's involved in a language he must change. For example, especially for a black writer, to be born in the English language is to realize the assumptions of that language, the assumptions of which that language operates, are his enemy. Freedom is the heart to make revolution.
Bike Walk Savannah offers bicycle education programs for children and adults, including bicycle rodeos. Nationally certified instructors ensure that all education programs are safe, informative, and enjoyable for participants. They also offer customized programs for businesses and other organizations that are seeking to make bicycling and walking part of their employees' wellness programs. More information is available at bikewalksavannah.org.
The Live Oak Public Library System offers local residents access to hundreds of thousands of movies, television programs, albums, audiobooks, ebooks, and digital comic books for free on your streaming television and mobile devices through the Hoopla app. Supported devices include Roku, Fire, Apple TV, iPhone, and Android, among others. The selection is vast. All you'll need is your library card. Find the Hoopla app on your device and more information at liveoakpl.org.
What does it mean when we say that WRUU is a community radio station? It doesn't just mean that we invite the community to create programming, and it doesn't just mean that we are a voice for the community. It also means that we are counting on the community to keep us going, and you are the community. Almost all of our modest budget comes from small annual or monthly donations from listeners like you. You get to enjoy our community-focused programming because many others have stepped forward to do their part. Now do your part by joining our community of listener donors. Go to wruu.org right now and make a one-time or monthly donation. And thank you for supporting Savannah's community radio station, 107.5 FM.
In our next Yaupin and Buna segment, we have activist scholar Roger Haman speaking about a WWS intensive we had a few weeks ago. It was called OSHE, standing for Obersalzberg, Savannah, and the Harvested Encomium. Obersalzberg was the place that Hitler actually made his lair to conduct business, to make up all the really racist and fascist ideas that he did. And what we did was study closely how those things are no different than a Confederate, antebellum, and colonialism, particularly settler colonialism, ideals that came out of the United States. In fact, a lot of those things were the things that inspired him. The Yaupin and the Buna, Yaupin being a Native American drink here that Native American people, indigenous people use to stimulate strong dialogue, discourse, and a truth-telling, is similar to the one in East Africa called the Buna ceremony, where in Ethiopia they had a coffee ceremony that brought people together for strong dialogue, speaking truth to power, speaking directly to community. And we hope to reinitiate that here in our dialogues in Savannah and elsewhere. Raja Haman.
My name is Raja Leon Haman. I was born and raised in Germany. I am Afro-German, a concept, an identity that is hard to fathom for many. When I tell people here in the US that I'm from Germany, they usually assume that someone in my family must have been military, which is not the case. And even in Germany, people typically ask where I was really from and compliment me on how well I speak German. My father is Nigerian and my mother is German. The dominant representation of Germany, of Europe for that matter, is white though. And things are changing, even if slowly, but still. David had asked me to speak to you about my experiences here and share some observations that I've made in Savannah and in the U.S. in general. I am a PhD student in cultural and social anthropology doing research on Black liberation struggles in Gullah-Geechee. This is what led me to the Lowcountry. Before I came to Savannah, I lived in Charleston for about 4 months. And it is curious, people said to me that I will like Savannah a lot and that it was different from Charleston. And of course, it is. It's a different place. The layout of a city is different, the architecture, the demographics. However, when you look beyond that, when you scrutinize the ways in which the city represents itself, the ways in which certain groups of people have a place in the public memory and others do not, and some are therewith included or excluded from the imaginations of the present and the future of society, then you will find that there's actually not such a great difference between Savannah and Charleston after all. Someone said to me that Savannah has always been a little bit behind Charleston, and that person was referring to Gullah-Geechee being more present in the city of Charleston. And what Charleston is indeed doing more effectively is exploit the cultural capital of Gullah-Geechee. Again, apart from that, when it comes to dynamics of both symbolic and socioeconomic marginalization, both places are very much products of the same concerted efforts to recreate the Old South, glorify the deeds and experiences of the white male colonialists, Confederates, and segregationists. When David and I first spoke with one another over the phone, he asked me to go to the Baobab Lounge, which is located in the Marriott Hotel complex at Riverfront Park. In light of what we had spoken about before, I had already expected something bad, but getting there I was still surprised. Surprised by how blatantly people of African descent, in particular and natives in general, are being constructed as mere objects, accessories to the romantic and historic vibe of the city, and all of that in public. The Baobab Lounge is, as the name implies, a lounge. I think they have both drinks and food, which, given its location, is tailored towards the more wealthy. Now, imagine you enter the hotel complex. It's a brick building, perfectly air-conditioned, of course. You're coming into the east entrance. Turn to your left and walk towards what resembles a mall that is in there with different gift shops, jewelry, etc. On your way there, you notice fossils that have been attached to the walls and glass cases, petrified prehistoric snails and such. Coming into the mall, you see more of these exhibits on the walls and placed all across the space, as well as precious stones, large amethysts, and finally, you see the more than 30 feet long replica of a dinosaur skeleton hanging from the ceiling. You go on, and after you've crossed about 1/3 of the room, you notice 2 statues on your left, standing to the sides of the entrance of what you realize is the Baobab Lounge. The statue on the left is supposed to be a representation of a man of African descent, or possibly Native American, bare-chested with a strong, muscular body, carrying a spear and a shield. The statue on the right, a woman of probably African descent, again possibly Native American. The decisive term here is native and indigenous, obviously. Any people who are seen like that as primitive could be imagined there. The statue of the female is shown with a highly elaborate necklace, earrings, her breasts uncovered, her left arm wrapped centrally around her right hip. The dress that covers only her lower body appears as if it was about to slip, revealing parts of her thighs and of her pubic mound. The lounge itself is decorated with skulls of exotic animals, whether real or fake I cannot say, with zebra prints, leather, and close-up portraits of black people, likely African. I leave the interpretation of the scene to you. The last thing I would like to bring up is the representation of the sites of former plantations here in the U.S. David told me about his research on the ties between Nazi ideology, U.S. white supremacy, and colonialism, and how there is a continuity between these ideologies, how they in fact deeply inspire one another. He asked me to compare my experiences with sites of former concentration camps and death camps to the sites of former plantations here. Evidently, there are parallels, which are much too often not spoken about. All these were places of unimaginable torment, horror, violence, and subjugation, and even if in different ways, they were all about the destruction of people. Often the distinction is being made that the Holocaust was about the literal extermination of Jewish people, whereas enslavement was about exploitation. And that is, for the most part, a sound argument. However, there was more to both systems. Jewish people were exploited too, even after their deaths, through the appropriation of their homes, their assets. And they had been discriminated against for centuries already. And the enslaved people, which include both people of African descent and early on, Native Americans too, were literally worked to death, as they were seen as nothing but dispensable tools. This changed, of course, as the supply of Africans dried up with the abolition of the trade with enslaved people. Apart from that, crucially, enslavement was always about the destruction of the identities of the enslaved, the specific cultural identities and their very identities as human beings of equal value. And this is what we call cultural, symbolic, or psychological genocide. Coming back to the ways in which the sites of this attempted destruction are commemorated, most sites of former plantations have become tourist destinations, places that serve the reproduction of the narrative of a romantic, genteel, antebellum South. This reconstruction of the South was very deliberate and started in the late 19th and early 20th century, when the owners of these places sought to create new revenue streams and began inviting people to visit their grand estates. This kind of tourism to sites of former concentration camps and death camps would be unimaginable. Given the different time at which these atrocities were committed in Europe, and a very different perspective onto these events by the international community, these places have always been principally about mourning, reminding its visitors of the fatal errors of the past so that they may not be repeated ever again. And I personally, having visited these sites too, would say that they are indeed doing a better job than most sites of former plantations here in the U.S. at critically engaging with history. At the same time, it's not as if there were no problematic aspects at all. I visited Auschwitz in Poland, for example, and since so many people come there, it has to be highly organized, and it can feel a little bit as if you were just quickly guided through, rushed through almost, through the place. And when David and I spoke about that, he remarked that there might also be an element of visiting these places in order to experience horror as entertainment. And that may be the case for some people. I could very well imagine that, but I don't know. One of the greatest challenges or problems, actually, and this is something that David emphasizes all the time, as I understand it, is that the connection between these sites are not made visible. The Holocaust is commonly remembered in Germany and other majority white populations as the single greatest crime against humanity, taken away from the singularity of enslavement, the genocide against Native Americans, colonialism, and other atrocities, and veiling how all of this is connected. It is crucial, both ethically and analytically, that we take a global perspective onto all of these crimes and, to paraphrase David yet again, see them as part of a larger history of dehumanization.
In our next segment, called Echo Cultural Corner, we'll have a short comment by Elder Sadie Pleasant, who's lived in Savannah for a long time, born in 1933, and she'll talk about some of the Afro-Indigenous culture that used to be alive and well here in the city. So with these fresh chickens and everything, people had different ways of preparing them that kept them healthy. You mentioned before something about your aunt. What was her name?
My aunt used to get her chicken hot in the pan hot, put the chicken in and brown it on the outside. It would be brown on the outside, but the inside would not be fully cooked.
And she would eat it?
She would eat the hot chicken.
And this made her sick?
No.
Was she ever sick?
No.
And that's just the way she used to eat it, and nothing
happened to her.
And you had mentioned before that when she would sit down, like with her legs crossed, and get up at 80 years old?
I had an aunt that would sit down Indian style and get up the same way. And every day, 12 o'clock, she'd take a nap on the mat on the floor.
And how, when you say Indian style, what do you mean?
Cross her legs and sit down on the floor.
And get up that way?
And pop herself back up.
At 80?
I assume she was 80.
Oh, you don't know her age?
When she died, she was about 100.
So that's it for this month's Which Way Savannah Less Than Human Part 1 segment. We hope you join us again next month for Less Than Human Part 2, Which Way Savannah. Indeed, Which Way Savannah? Freedom is the heart to make revolution. See you next time.
me. I am caressed by the wings of a dove, not material love. I take my blessings from above. I get my drink where the water is cleaner from the miracle spring. Wherever I glean a new way today, ain't got to pay, cause the shelter of the servant is the love of the always.